She thought it was just a dusty hymnal, but the pages were glued shut for a terrifying reason. Before we begin, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being here, for taking time, not just to watch, but to take care of the body and spirit that's carried you this far. She didn't go looking for a secret. All she wanted was an extra credit assignment, something simple to pad her GPA and buy her some peace in a hectic semester. Ava Miller wasn't the kind of student who chased conspiracies. She was methodical, quiet, the kind who color-coded her class notes and showed up 10 minutes early to every shift. So when the campus work-study office offered a short-term archival project with St. Benjamin's Parish Library, she barely hesitated. Dusty hymnals, yellowing paperwork, easy work, quiet hours. Nothing about it said danger. St. Benjamin's looked like it hadn't aged well. The stained glass windows were fogged with mildew, and the whole place smelled like old wood and unspoken guilt. They said it was once a thriving parish, but now the diocese was preparing to shut it down. Ava worked mostly in the rear hall, sorting through hymnals stacked like forgotten memories. Most were brittle, their covers cracked, their pages loose from time and heat. She moved carefully, treating each book like it still meant something to someone. It was a Wednesday when she found the one that changed everything. The church was silent, the kind of silence that rings in your ears when there's too much space. Her fingers paused over a brown hymnal whose spine had warped strangely, as if moisture had curled it from within. She opened it casually at first, but the pages stuck. She frowned, tried again, then realized the sheets weren't just aged. They were glued. A seam of yellowed adhesive sealed several pages tight, as though someone had pressed them together deliberately. A prank? A repair job? She held the book closer. There was something about the way the glue cracked at the edges, like it had been there for decades. That night, she brought it home. She told herself it was out of academic curiosity, but a part of her felt pulled, as if the book had been waiting for someone to find it. Ava sat at her kitchen table under the low hum of a single overhead bulb. She took a scalpel from her art kit and gently began separating the sealed pages. The glue flaked like brittle scabs. Her heart beat louder with each delicate pull. Between pages 12 and 13, she found it. A small paper envelope, pressed flat, yellowed with age. On the front, a short phrase in faded cursive. Don't let them silence this. Her breath hitched. Hands trembling slightly, she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of notebook paper, creased 4 times. Ink slightly smudged, written in a hand that was both neat and urgent. She read it once, then twice. It wasn't poetry. It wasn't prayer. It was confession. A plea. The voice of a girl who had seen too much and trusted too little. To whoever finds this, if you're reading this, it means no one listened to me the first time. Or the second. Maybe no one ever will. My name is Emily, and I worked here at St. Benjamin's in 1982. I saw what happened. I saw what they did, and they told me I was wrong, that I was confused, that I would ruin lives if I spoke. But a boy was hurt. His name was Mark, and I saw it. I heard the door shut. I heard the silence afterward. They sent me away when I told the truth. Told my parents I needed counseling, but they never asked what happened. Not really. If this letter is still here, then no one ever believed me. But maybe you will. Please, don't let them bury this. Ava put the letter down like it might burn her. For a moment, the room felt smaller, like the air itself recoiled from the words. She tried to think logically. Maybe it was a hoax. Maybe someone planted it there as a joke. Maybe it was fiction. But something in that ink, in that voice, reached past the years and wrapped around her spine. She looked back at the hymnal. Nothing else inside. Just that one cry for help, preserved in glue and time. She didn't sleep much that night. Her apartment felt different. Less like home, more like a waiting room. Her roommate Rachel noticed. "You okay?" Ava nodded, lied, "Just tired." She didn't show her the letter. Not yet. Instead, she sat on her laptop and began looking. She searched for St. Benjamin's Church abuse, for Emily 1982, for Mark and parish staff. She found almost nothing. A few articles about the parish's decline, a vague mention of a priest reassigned in 1991. No details. The silence was loud. Still, she didn't throw the letter away. She didn't call anyone. She just kept rereading that final line. Please, don't let them bury this. She returned to the church 2 days later. Same hallway, same musty shelves. But now, everything felt heavier, as if the walls knew what she carried. She checked more hymnals. Most were empty. But in one of them, she found something curious. A small corner of a photograph stuck between pages. It had been torn. Only half a face remained. A boy, maybe 16, sharp eyes, fear behind them. She flipped it over. Just one word. Mark? And that was the moment Ava knew she couldn't ignore it. That something real had happened here. That this wasn't just a story someone made up to be dramatic. This was a breadcrumb trail, one left by someone who had no reason to lie. She packed the hymnal, the envelope, and the torn photo into her bag. She didn't know what she was going to do next, but as she stepped outside and the late afternoon sun hit her face, Ava felt something she hadn't expected. Not fear, not dread, responsibility. Because sometimes the truth doesn't shout. It waits, in glue, in faded ink, in silence. And now, it had chosen her. The next morning broke colder than it should have for spring. Marin stood on the chapel steps before sunrise, hands buried deep in the sleeves of her hoodie, her breath forming ghosts in the air. She didn't know why she came back so early. Maybe it was the dream that woke her, a dream where voices hummed beneath her dorm floor, and one word kept echoing like it had been nailed into the walls. Look. She unlocked the chapel with the borrowed key and stepped into the stillness. The pews sat in silence, rows of wooden backs holding dust like memory. It smelled of hymnals and forgotten incense, a scent that made her feel too young and too old all at once. She walked toward the back shelf again. The same hymnal waited there. Same thick binding. Same stiffness to its spine like it had been forced to hide something for too long. This time, she didn't hesitate. She peeled back the cover, thumbed along the glued edges. Her fingernail found the softest part of the seal, like a wound waiting to be reopened. She slid her finger down the seam until it gave way with a dry crackle. Dust rose like ash. Inside, instead of music, there was a folded sheet of paper, yellowed, thin, typewritten, and taped to it a small black and white photograph of a boy, 11, maybe 12. Choir robe, wide eyes. There was something in his expression that stopped her heart for a beat. Not fear, not innocence. It was endurance. She unfolded the letter slowly. The typewritten words were crooked, uneven, like the machine had shaken with every word. I'm writing this because I cannot sing anymore. Not with what I've seen. Not after what happened to Thomas. Her throat tightened. Her eyes ran down the page faster now. They told us never to speak, that God would be angry, but I don't believe God lives in this place anymore. The words hit like gravel tossed into her chest. She read on. They took us one by one after rehearsal. Always the same room, always the same man. I heard Thomas cry when they called his name. He was never the same again. And then he was just gone. They said his parents moved, but I know he didn't go home. I know because I found his sock in the furnace room, burnt. I remember his feet always smelled like pine cleaner. Marin closed her eyes. Her hands were shaking. I'm hiding this in the hymnal I always use. Page 1444. Come ye disconsolate. Fitting, right? She flipped through the hymnal. Page 1444 was still there. No music had ever been sung from it. If someone finds this, I hope it means I'm gone from this place. Or maybe I'm still here, but not me anymore. If you find this, don't tell the priest. Tell the police. Tell someone who hasn't memorized how to smile with their teeth closed. The letter wasn't signed, just an initial. J. Marin sat back on the pew. Her hands felt hollow, like she had touched something meant to stay buried. The chapel was still quiet, but it wasn't the kind of silence she had known before. This one was thick. It pressed down. Like the room was holding its breath, waiting to see what she'd do next. She stared at the photograph again. The boy, Thomas maybe, or Jay, or someone else who had vanished behind Latin verses and Sunday coats. The longer she looked, the more she felt like he was watching her too, not pleading, but daring her to not look away. She didn't know what time it was when she finally stood up. She walked out of the chapel with the letter clutched in both hands, heart drumming like a warning. She didn't go back to her dorm. She walked straight to the student life office, asking for someone, anyone, in charge. A woman in her 40s with kind eyes and worry lines took her to a side room. Marin laid the letter on the table. The woman read silently, her face shifting from confusion to disbelief to something far colder, recognition. This is from St. Jude's, the woman said finally. The chapel was part of the original orphan school that closed in the late 80s. We keep it open for alumni events and theology students, but no one's been in the archives in years. Marin's skin prickled. She asked if there were records of the children who'd lived there. The woman hesitated. They were sealed after the merger. There were rumors, lawsuits that never fully came to light. She said she'd bring it to the university's legal office, but as Marin stood, she noticed the woman had quietly slipped the photo of the boy into her own folder, separate from the letter. Wait, Marin said. Why did you do that? The woman froze, then smiled, too quickly. Just keeping it safe, she said. You did the right thing, bringing this in. Marin left the office with the echo of that smile stuck in her mind like a splinter. The kind of smile that closes doors instead of opening them. That evening, she went back to the chapel one last time, just to sit, to listen. She sat on the pew, staring again at the shelf. The empty slot where the hymnal had been looked cleaner now, as if someone had wiped it. The lights buzzed overhead, and outside, a thundercloud rolled somewhere beyond the hill. That's when she noticed something new, or maybe something old finally becoming visible. Carved into the side of the pew, in faint block letters barely deeper than a scratch, were the words, "Page 144 is not the only one." The night tasted like metal. Marin couldn't get the words out of her head. Page 144 is not the only one. The scratches in the pew looked like they'd been made with a broken key or a nail. They were small, intentional, and worn by time. Whoever carved them didn't want to be loud. They just needed to be remembered. Back in her dorm, she couldn't sleep. She left her desk lamp on, its yellow glow casting long shadows on the wall. The photocopy of the letter lay beside her, and she'd gone over it 10 times already, trying to make sense of what she had read, what she had stepped into. She searched online for the names in the letter. Thomas, J, the orphanage, St. Jude's Chapel. And one article popped up in a newspaper archive from 1984, a tiny 2-paragraph piece about a boy named Thomas R., who had tragically relocated from the orphanage after health concerns. No funeral, no follow-up. She stared at that word. Relocated. It didn't sound tragic. It sounded administrative, like something heavy was boxed up and sent away. The next morning, she returned to the chapel, armed with a flashlight and a legal pad. She didn't want to be dramatic, but something told her this wasn't going to disappear into a file cabinet. Something was asking to be known. The hymnals were still there, untouched. She pulled a few more from the same shelf, one at a time. Most were normal. Pages yellowed, notes scribbled in margins, an occasional pressed flower. But when she reached for the 6th one, something felt wrong. It was heavier than the others. She opened it carefully. At first, it looked like just another hymnal. But as she flipped to the back, something was taped between the final 2 pages. Another letter. This one was handwritten in blue ink, the kind that fades into gray over decades. "No one ever sings the last verse," it began. She read slowly, her hands sweating. "They think it's because the melody is too difficult, but it's because we didn't want to remember." Verse 3 was always the one where we could see the shadow in the balcony. The man with the silver ring. He wore it on his thumb. Said it was his promise to God, but I think it was his promise to himself, that we wouldn't speak, that our voices belonged to him. Marin's mouth went dry. He touched us in silence, then asked us to sing louder the next morning. Said pain made the spirit clean. No signature, no date, just another note, like the previous one, buried where no one should find it unless they were looking for something else. Marin felt her stomach twist. She took the letter, slid it carefully into her folder, and sat back. The chapel creaked above her, old beams groaning under the weight of a history no one had agreed to carry. But it was hers now. She couldn't pretend she hadn't seen it. She took the legal pad and began writing down everything. Dates, names, verses, anything that repeated. There was a pattern forming, quiet but undeniable, and that's when she noticed it. All the letters mentioned hymns, specific ones. Page 144, verse 3. There was something ritualistic in it, like the songs were hiding the very memories they were meant to glorify. She reached for the oldest hymnal in the stack, a brown one with cracked corners. It had been rebound, the kind of fix you'd make if something was used often. The spine groaned as she opened it. She turned to the index and scanned for the most cited hymns. There it was again. Come, ye disconsolate. Page 144, but there were faint pencil marks next to other hymn titles, as if someone had been building a map. She followed them. Page 88, nothing. Page 212, nothing. Page 300. At page 300, the book's binding was unnaturally thick. She lifted the page and found a folded slip tucked between the stitching. She pulled it out. It was a photo. Another choir boy, this one looking directly into the camera. His smile was uncertain, his hands folded too tight. On the back, scrawled in faint cursive, I heard his screams through the floor. Marin stood up, dizzy. She left the chapel, her ears ringing. It wasn't just a forgotten story anymore. It was a system that had swallowed children whole and left their ghosts in verse and linen. She called the woman from student life again. This time, she asked directly, "Did something happen here in the 70s or 80s at the orphanage?" The woman paused. There were rumors, but by the time we inherited the property, everything had been sealed. Yes. Children went missing. I'm not allowed to. Someone has to be. The line went quiet. Later that evening, Marin received an anonymous email from a burner address. No subject line, just a single sentence. Don't stop looking. They used to keep records in the confessional wall. She stared at it for a long time. Then she went back. The chapel was dark. She didn't turn on the main lights, only her flashlight. It moved like a whisper across the altar. She found the old confessional on the left wall, beneath the stained glass window of the Pietà. The wooden screen was faded. She touched the panel gently. Nothing moved. Then she pressed against the back panel. It gave just slightly, enough to tell her something was loose. She found a flathead key from the supply room and used it to pry at the seam. After a minute, the panel popped outward with a soft groan. Inside was a hollow space. Small, cramped, but not empty. Folders, 6 of them, each one marked by year: 1973, 1974, 1975. She reached for the first. Inside were photos, notes, letters, drawings by children. All of them bore initials, and one consistent symbol at the corner: a ring, silver, wide-banded, always on the thumb in every image of the hand that rested on a shoulder or a cheek or a robe. She wasn't sure how long she sat there. At some point, the flashlight dimmed, but she kept reading, kept turning pages, because now the silence wasn't empty. It was echoing. It was filled with voices of children who had whispered their truths into songs, into margins, into hymns no one dared to sing aloud. And just as she closed the final folder, one more piece of paper fluttered out. A list. Names. All boys. And at the bottom, in a different ink, a single name added later: Marin Ellis, 2024. The list haunted her. Marin sat on the chapel steps long after the sun had gone down. The folder clutched against her chest like it was something alive. Her name. It was her name, written in the same pen, same ink as children who had vanished 40, 50 years ago. Her breath caught in her throat every time she thought of it. She hadn't even been born when most of the entries were dated. So why had someone written her name there, at the end of it all, like a final verse waiting to be sung? The wind shifted around her, brushing dry leaves against the stone, and for a brief moment she imagined voices writing on it, small, muffled, familiar in a way she couldn't explain. She didn't cry. She couldn't. Not yet. She needed answers first. The next morning, she met with her professor, Dr. Whitmore, under the guise of updating her research on local religious music history. He was a soft-spoken man in his 70s who had been with the university longer than most of its buildings. She watched him pour tea into a chipped blue mug, his hands steady, his eyes kind. She wanted to believe he could be trusted. "Have you ever heard of anything unusual happening at St. Jude's?" she asked casually. He paused, then nodded, as if he'd been waiting years for someone to finally ask that exact question. "It was an open secret," he said. "There were whispers in the 1980s, a few stories, mostly from students who came from the orphanage before it closed. But no one ever followed up. No one wanted to be the first to say the church had cracks in its walls." "Did any staff ever speak up?" "A custodian, once," he said, almost in a whisper, "said he found items, things in the walls. But he disappeared. Literally just stopped showing up one day. Rumor was he tried to tell the diocese and was paid to leave the state." Marin leaned forward. "Do you remember his name?" He shook his head. "I only met him once. But I remember this. He wore a silver ring, thick, like a class ring. Wore it on his thumb." Marin's stomach dropped. Her voice was barely audible. "Like the ones in the photos." He looked at her sharply. "What photos?" She didn't answer, just closed her notebook and left the room, her heart racing. She returned to her dorm, locked the door, and laid out the 6 folders on the floor. Names, sketches, testimonies written in tiny, uncertain handwriting. Over and over the same description. A priest, or someone dressed as one, wearing a silver thumb ring. The ring man, one boy called him. Another drew only the outline of a face, no features, but a huge silver ring on the left thumb, dark and heavy. In every document, fear bled through the paper. Marin had to find someone who had lived it, someone still alive. She opened the oldest folder again and traced a name that appeared more than once. Samuel B. She typed the name into every database she could access. After an hour, a match. Samuel Barrett, born 1967, currently living in Southern Illinois. She found an email listed under a Veterans Outreach Program. She hesitated, then typed, "My name is Marin Ellis. I'm researching St. Jude's Chapel and its orphanage history. I found your name in the archived files. I believe you may have information I need. I know this is sudden, but I'm trying to understand what happened there, and I believe someone added my name to the same list as yours." She hit send. Seconds passed. Then minutes. An hour. Nothing. Just as she was about to shut her laptop, the reply arrived. It said only, "I hope no one would ever find that chapel again. But if you're on the list, it means it started again. I'll talk. Come alone." Attached was a location and a time. The next day, noon. Marin didn't sleep that night. She watched the clock until the sun spilled through the blinds, then packed the folders into a backpack, along with a recorder, her notes, and a flash drive with duplicates, just in case. Part of her still wanted to believe this was all some mistake, a cruel coincidence, or a forgotten story twisted by time. But the list said otherwise. She drove 3 hours south to a weather-beaten town that looked like it hadn't changed since 1950. The address led her to a one-story building next to a shuttered VFW hall. She knocked. The door opened, and a man in his 50s stood there, worn but tall, with tired eyes and shoulders that slumped like they'd carried something too heavy for too long. "You're the girl," he said, "with the hymnal." She nodded. "Come in." Inside was simple. No TV, just books, old vinyl records, and photos on the wall of men in uniform. He poured coffee, sat across from her, and studied her face for a long time before speaking. "I was 8 when I left that place," he began. "But the chapel, that's what stayed." He pulled out a wrinkled piece of notebook paper from his wallet. On it was a verse. Marin recognized it instantly. Page 144. "He made us sing it every week. Said the song would erase the sin. But we hadn't sinned. He had." Her throat tightened. "He'd wait until after confession. Late at night. Said the Holy Spirit worked best in silence. He said we were special. Chosen. I believed him, at first." He showed her his thumb, a scar that curved around the knuckle like a burn. "I bit him. That's why he stopped." Marin felt nausea rise. Samuel continued. "We tried to tell someone, but the records were sealed. Our names weren't ours anymore. Some kids were moved. Others didn't make it." He looked away. "The worst part?" he whispered. "He said if we ever told, our names would appear again on the list. And that meant it wasn't over." Marin pulled out the page. "Mine's at the bottom." Samuel didn't react. He just nodded slowly. "Then you understand why you can't stop now." She reached for her backpack, pulled out the photo of the boy from the confessional file. "Do you know who this is?" He stared for a long time. "Gregory S. He was my best friend. He's the reason I escaped. He pushed me through the chapel window one night, then stayed behind to distract the ringman. I never saw him again." Marin felt something inside her fracture. Samuel stood up, walked to a closet, and returned with a box. Inside was a hymnal, older than the ones she'd found, and beneath it, a small cassette tape. "I recorded it. One night, I hid a recorder under the pew. It's not clear, but you'll hear the footsteps, the singing, and something else." He handed it to her. "If your name's on that list, Marin, it means he's still watching. Maybe not him. Maybe someone like him. This doesn't end in ink. It ends in fire." She left the house shaken. The cassette felt heavier than anything she'd ever held. A memory someone tried to bury, passed like a torch. She didn't know what was waiting in the chapel next, but the list was no longer just names. It was voices, and hers had just joined the chorus. Marin didn't drive straight back to the university. She couldn't. The cassette tape sat in the passenger seat like a living thing, humming with memory. She hadn't even played it yet, but it already felt like it knew more than she did. That night, she stopped at a roadside motel with flickering neon lights and rooms that smelled of wood paneling and old soap. She locked the door, drew the curtains, and took a breath. She slid the cassette into her handheld recorder, pressed play, and closed her eyes. At first, nothing. Just the soft hiss of analog silence. Then, faint shuffling, a door creaking, the echo of distant breath, the sound of a hymn so faint, so distorted it barely sounded human. Then the voice. Not words, not language, just humming, low, deliberate, like something performing religion rather than praying. And underneath it, a second sound, a small voice, maybe a child, maybe more than one, pleading. And then she stopped the tape. It felt like a violation, even listening. Marin stared at the ceiling. Samuel was right. This wasn't a story in an archive anymore. It was still moving, still reaching. And if she didn't speak, if she didn't act, it would find someone else to carry the silence. At 4:12 a.m., she called the police. Not 911, just the local precinct back in Lancaster. She gave her name, explained she was a student researching historical abuse cases linked to St. Jude's Chapel, and asked if there had ever been any official complaints or missing children investigations tied to the church or its orphanage. The man on the phone was polite. He promised to check. Took her number. Said someone would call back. But in his voice, Marin could already hear the reflexive shrug of bureaucracy. The weight of time was too heavy for some people to lift. By sunrise, she was already on the road again. This time, not to her dorm, but to the chapel. When she arrived, it was quiet. Too quiet. She parked, grabbed her backpack, and walked through the front doors like she had the first time. Except now, every pew felt haunted. The walls seemed narrower, like they were closing in. She made her way to the baptismal pool, the place where the shoes had been found. It was still drained, covered in construction tarps. But something drew her to it. An instinct, maybe something deeper. She stepped into the dry basin, knelt down, and felt the cool stone under her hands. Something clicked beneath her palm. A loose tile. She pried at it, slowly, carefully, until the edge lifted, revealing a hollow space beneath. Inside, a bundle wrapped in deteriorated cloth. She pulled it out, heart pounding. The cloth crumbled like ash, revealing a crucifix, blackened with age. Not just any crucifix. Its base was engraved. She held it up to the light and squinted. 3 initials. G.S. Gregory S. Her breath caught. She staggered out of the pool, her hands shaking. This wasn't just a hiding place. It was a grave. Or a message. Maybe both. Suddenly, footsteps. Marin froze. Not a construction crew. Not that early. She backed into the shadows near the side altar, holding her breath as a man entered from the vestibule. Tall, dressed in custodial gray, carrying a clipboard. He paused, then turned toward the pool. She watched him from behind the altar veil. Something about him felt off. Not dangerous, exactly. Just wrong in some small, precise way. Too still, too calculated. He bent down, reached into the same space she had just opened, and pulled back his hand, confused when he found it empty. Marin realized he was looking for the crucifix. She didn't wait. She slipped out the side door, heart racing, and didn't stop until she was 2 blocks away. Only then did she realize she had dropped her phone somewhere in the chapel. Panic tightened around her lungs, but she couldn't go back. Instead, she found a library nearby, logged into a public terminal, and opened the files she had saved. She had names, dates, the recorder, The crucifix. She needed help, but not the kind that came with polite promises and closed files. She opened her email and began typing a message to someone she never thought she'd contact, a reporter. Her mother had mentioned her once, a woman named Dana Rourke, who had once been a student journalist and who had exposed a local corruption scandal in their district. Dana had since become a respected investigative reporter in Chicago, known for chasing stories no one else dared touch. Marin kept it short. I'm a student researcher from Lancaster University. I've uncovered evidence of a decades-long abuse cover-up at St. Jude's Chapel, tied to missing children and sealed church files. I have audio, physical items, and the name of at least one living survivor. I believe more lives are at risk. Please contact me. Urgent. She hit send, then closed the browser and waited. By nightfall, Dana replied. Subject: I believe you. I've been waiting for someone to confirm the St. Jude's rumors for 15 years. I've got sources. I've got records. What I don't have is what you seem to be holding. Let's meet tomorrow morning. Safe place. Bring everything. And then a location. Marin exhaled for the first time in what felt like days. But as she stepped outside the library, she saw it. Across the street, near the corner of the chapel's crumbling bell tower, a figure, the same uniform, standing motionless, watching her. She backed slowly into the shadows and slipped down a side alley, hugging her backpack. She didn't know who he was, but now she knew this. She wasn't the only one chasing the truth, and whoever was trying to bury it, they weren't done digging yet. The coffee shop Dana had chosen wasn't the kind of place Marin would have picked. Too visible, too bright. It was an old bank-turned cafe with vaulted ceilings and clattering espresso machines that echoed like a cathedral of distraction. But Dana Rourke knew what she was doing. There were always people around. Witnesses. Cameras. No place for secrets to stay hidden. No place for danger to hide either. Marin arrived just before 9, the recorder and crucifix wrapped tightly in cloth inside her bag. Her hands were cold despite the spring air. She'd barely slept, and the shadows under her eyes mirrored the heaviness she carried in her chest. As she walked in, she spotted Dana immediately. Auburn hair tied back, laptop open, her face half lit by the window beside her. She looked older than the photos Marin had seen, harder around the edges, but something in her eyes made Marin feel steadier. You must be Marin, Dana said, standing to shake her hand. I wasn't sure you'd show, Marin admitted. I wasn't sure you'd write, Dana said, smiling faintly. But I'm glad you did. They sat. Marin ordered tea she wouldn't drink. Dana didn't waste time. Tell me everything, she said. Not the facts, the thread, what pulled you in. So Marin told her. About the sealed hymnal, the glued pages, the letter, the cassette, Samuel, the crucifix, the man at the chapel. Each word felt like lifting a stone from her chest and laying it down between them. Dana listened like a sculptor, carving sense from silence. I've heard whispers for years, Dana finally said. Names buried, complaints ignored, transfers approved with a wink, but no hard evidence. Until now. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a file. Inside, a photocopy of a missing child report from 1982. The boy's name was Gregory S., age 5, last seen in the custody of the St. Jude's Children's Choir. Marin's stomach twisted. Dana flipped to the next page. This report was never filed officially. A former caseworker leaked it to me before she died. Said the original was destroyed. The photo was grainy, but the boy's eyes were unmistakable. It was the same face from the back of the crucifix, the same eyes that haunted Marin from the photo at the archive. I think this is the child whose identity your friend Samuel was given, Dana said. And if that's true, someone had to erase Gregory to make Samuel exist. Marin leaned back, overwhelmed. But who has that kind of power? Who could rewrite a child's life like that? Dana looked at her. The church, the state, and the people who decide which stories we're allowed to believe. She reached for her laptop and opened a map. A cluster of red dots marked the locations of now-defunct orphanages and chapels tied to the same diocese as St. Jude's. 5 closed in the past 30 years, Dana said. Every single one had anonymous complaints filed about child welfare violations. But the paper trail vanishes after the initial reports. No follow-up, no prosecutions, just silence. She zoomed in on one dot near Lancaster. This one burned down in '85, officially ruled an accident, but the fire inspector I spoke with said something was off. No origin point, no accelerants, just a place that erased itself. Marin felt the walls of the coffee shop closing in. So, what do we do? Dana smiled, but it wasn't soft. It was the smile of someone who'd been told stop 1,000 times and never listened. We publish, she said. We gather everything, every tape, every photo, every file. We name names. We make it impossible to ignore. But it could put people in danger, Marin said. Samuel, you, me. Dana nodded. The truth always does, but so does silence. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Dana slid her phone across the table. Listen to this, she said. Marin picked it up and pressed play. A man's voice filled the speaker, calm, precise. You think what you're doing is righteous, but you don't understand the rot you're digging into. This isn't just about one child or one chapel. This is about an entire generation we had to protect by any means necessary. If you keep pushing, more people will suffer, just like before. The call ended. He called me last night, Dana said. Blocked number. But the voice is familiar. I've heard him before. 20 years ago, during the Glenwood scandal. Did you report it? Marin asked. To who? Dana said. Half the people who should care are the ones protecting this. Marin thought about the man she saw near the chapel. The empty look in his eyes, the clipboard, like he was running inventory on a haunted place. What do they want? She asked softly. Dana's voice hardened. They want us to forget, to doubt, to think the past can't reach us now. Marin reached into her bag and pulled out the crucifix, setting it on the table between them. Then maybe it's time we remind them it can. They stared at it together, a relic of pain disguised as faith. That night, they moved fast. Dana called in a favor from a private digital forensics lab. They cleaned the tape, enhanced the voices. What emerged was horrifying. Children whispering names, a priest praying, almost chanting, as someone sobbed behind him. At one point, the words "confession by fire" were repeated over and over. Then a scream. Then nothing. Dana's editor hesitated when she first pitched the story. It's too old, he said. Too messy. So Dana leaked the tape to a trusted podcast producer instead. Within 24 hours, a clip went viral. By morning, St. Jude's tape was trending. And then the phone rang. This time, Marin answered. A voice she didn't recognize. Quiet, male, measured. "You have something that doesn't belong to you," he said. Her blood went cold. "Who is this?" "You don't want to go any further." "Or what?" There was a pause. "Samuel won't be safe, and neither will you." Click. She stared at the receiver in her hand, feeling like it was coated in ice. By the time she and Dana arrived at Samuel's house the next morning, the front door was ajar. They stepped inside. The TV was on, static humming. A pot boiled over on the stove, and in the hallway, a smear of something dark led to the back door. Samuel was gone. Marin's knees buckled. Dana pulled her back, whispered, "We have to move fast." They called the police, filed a report. But deep down, they both knew no one would really look. So they did it themselves. They traced a phone ping. Samuel's emergency contact had a location-sharing app he'd forgotten was still active. It placed him near the woods, just outside Lancaster, near a place called Glory Hill, a retreat once owned by the diocese, now abandoned. They drove for hours in silence. By the time they reached the gates, it was nearly dusk. The trees loomed like sentinels. The building itself was collapsing in places, roof caved, windows black with mildew. Inside, they found pews stacked like barricades, hymnals scattered, and in the main hall, a mural, half painted, half erased, children with angel wings, a priest holding a book. But the eyes were all scratched out, every last one. Dana raised her flashlight. "Marin," she whispered, "look." In the corner, under the altar, a hatch, locked. But someone had left a hammer nearby. They broke it open. A stairwell. Marin's heart beat like a warning. As they descended, the light narrowed, the air thickened. At the bottom, a room, lit only by candles. And on the wall, a message written in soot. "He still sings." In the far corner, something moved, and as Marin stepped closer, the outline of a boy, older now but unmistakable, curled in a blanket, eyes wide, mouth gagged. Samuel, alive. But he wasn't alone. Behind him, a shadow stepped forward, clerical collar, dead eyes, and the same voice from the tape